Hi, Meg Riley here in Minneapolis with another episode of The VUU. Today we're talking to Adam Gerhardstein, a lawyer in Cincinnati, Ohio, and all over Ohio, really, coming to us from Dayton today, talking about holding police accountable and how you can do that and how we can do that. But first, I'll have the regulars introduce themselves. Jess, do you want to start and talk about a little bit about the logistics here?
Yeah, this is Jessica Star Rockers from the Seattle, Washington area. You can see behind me, it's still dark. And I am doing tech today. I'm also fielding your questions on the chat on YouTube. And I'm also tweeting any fantastic and important things that our hosts and our guests say today. So meet me on there too with the hashtag #TheView.
And hi, everyone. This is Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York. Good to see you. And Meg, I understand there are some election things going on in Minneapolis, like there are here in New York. You want to tell us about this?
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in this, and I hope other people will chime in from where you are. I'm in a very democratic city. Pretty much exclusively. The primaries are where a lot of things are figured out. And what we've had going on is a lot of mailings coming out, allegedly for mostly incumbents, because we have a lot of really progressive activists running. We have in almost every city council district, we have Black activists running for the park board, for all kinds of things, for the mayor. And they've been sending out, in the guise of being for more Democratic but more traditional incumbents, they've been sending out, I would call it hate mail, really talking about how these are dangerous people getting money from frightening groups, and they're and you get it. I've gotten now 6 of these very slick brochures from my incumbent city councilor, who is not somebody I support at all. I'm working for a Black lesbian who's running for office, and I keep getting these. They cost a lot of money, and I'm interested in, who's putting this money in and how they're doing this in the cities. I think it's one of the strongholds of the blue states is the cities. In fact, I went to a talk with Tim Walz, who's one of the 12 people running for Democratic governor here. And he said he's one of only 10 Democrats now representing rural areas in the whole country. And the people that voted for him also voted for Donald Trump in the last election. But I didn't know it had shrunk that much, that really it is the cities that are, you see those maps where it's blue and then red, but I was really taken aback that this is happening in my city and that I'm getting this stuff in my mailbox. And the incumbent says, hey, I didn't do it. In my opinion, he doesn't say it loudly and often enough, but I believe him that he didn't do it. And it's an independent, how they're supposed to have distance between PACs and candidates. There really is distance in this case because they're doing whatever they want for him. Do you see that in New York, Michael?
Oh, yeah, it's very, very prevalent here. Especially, I live in Westchester County, which is the northern suburb county of New York City. And Democrats outnumber Republicans in Westchester County by something like 2 or 3 to 1. Hillary Clinton won Westchester County with 85% of the vote last year. And our county executive is a Republican who is heavily supported and funded by national Republican interests, including a PAC, which it's just come out in the last week, has been being funded by Mercer of Breitbart, and to the tune of $1 million for a county executive race. And the mailings and the ads are they're not at the level of hate mail, but they're nasty. They take these nasty pictures. They're really, really nasty. The latest ad that's gone up has their TV ads. It's really very really very hateful, characterizing people. What the man running for mayor of the city that I live in, which is a city of about 25,000 people. a small suburban city, has another career as a rap artist, right? And so they're using his like hip hop lyrics to attack him politically, and it's fascinating and hateful, and probably will be successful, which is the really ugliest part.
Yeah, that is some of the creepiest part.
I hope it's not successful in Minneapolis, but it might be here. I mean, they're very clearly honing messages, like of text messages and personal messages, so that they can be used in other heavily Democratic places.
In Cincinnati, we have a mayoral race going on. Our incumbent is a white man Democrat he's sort of a conservative Democrat, and a lot of the moneyed interests in the city are behind him. And we have a candidate who's a black woman, and she's very much of the people, grassroots. She doesn't have all the money, but she's well liked. And it's funny you guys talk about this, because I got a mailing the other day for John Cranley, the incumbent, and it referred to like how he brought fiscal responsibility to the town hall, and we call it the city hall in Cincinnati. And I was just like, the town hall? And then I looked at like who it came from, and it wasn't from his campaign. And now I'm curious about whether this is a Republican sort of out of town effort to keep a business-friendly leader. But we haven't had a nasty election, because they just haven't really been on a warpath towards each other, and at least we've had that, and that's been nice.
Yeah, our candidates aren't doing nasty stuff. It's Minnesota, that wouldn't go well. But these mailers are really ramping it up. We have ranked choice voting here, so we have 16 mayoral candidates. I was just studying the ballot. It used to be you didn't have to do anything but submit your name. I think now you have to pay like not very much money to get your name on the ballot. So they're all, and they have to put them. It's so hilarious. I was looking at the sample ballot. They have to put all 16 for first choice, second choice, third choice. So it's this giant ballot. It's really funny.
And does it actually go down to 15th choice?
No, it just does 3 choices, but they have
okay.
to put all 16 candidates for each of them, right?
Right. But I mean, theoretically, they could go down to 15th choice with ranked choice voting and 16 candidates.
Thank God they do not. But yeah, I looked at the ballot and I thought, curious or incurious or here. It's funny, but it'll be really interesting. I mean, I don't know how these elections will go. I don't know that the paper here was taken over by a very conservative group, and they're supporting the most conservative of all the candidates, as well as a lot of other icky stuff that they're doing. But I don't know where the people are, with so many candidates. I just don't know. And we've had, there's one, I would say that there are like 4 really serious candidates out of the 16, and 2 of them are women, 2 of them are men, and some of the sexism has been ugly. Adam's old law professor, Nikki Levy-Pounds, is running. So it's, it's an interesting race.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up this issue, because it's something I've been thinking about. It raises the question of, in this so-called information age, I feel like information is becoming less and less reliable, and particular where it's coming from, what its biases are, what's the money behind it. You see Facebook and Twitter and on Capitol Hill testifying, and it makes me think maybe we do need more regulation of the information economy, so we're at least getting some transparency in the background as to where this is flowing from. Because it's scary when the electorate can be so influenced by forces that are reactive. We have 2 ballot issues here in Ohio that are just the brainchild of 2 rich people who got fired up about an issue in California and are trying to get constitutional amendments passed all across the nation because they're passionate about an issue. And it's weird to feel like your constitution could be changed because of the passion of a billionaire in California and you live in Ohio.
Yeah, yeah. We don't have any of those right now. It's definitely mid-year election. And of course, the turnout won't be high. So I have no idea what will happen. I know what I want to happen. I have no idea what will happen.
And speaking of constitutional amendments, the other interesting thing on the ballot in New York is every 20 years, we're mandated here to vote on whether to open a constitutional convention. And so this is the 20-year constitutional convention vote this year. And if the voters of New York vote yes, the entire Constitution is open to amendment, and we would be electing delegates to a constitutional convention next year. And lots of people are rightfully, I think, scared about the moneyed interests that would suddenly become very interested in New York if there were a constitutional convention. So
is that likely to win? Do you know?
You know, I've seen polls that actually have it yes leading, which is pretty astounding given that almost every organized group from the ACLU to the conservation voters to both Planned Parenthood and the Right to Life Foundation and all of the public sector unions are all against it. So I have no idea. But I've actually seen polls that have yes narrowly edging out no on that. But with 60% undecided or something ridiculous like that. I mean, there are people who don't even know it's on the ballot.
Are we talking about the angry white voters there?
No, I don't actually think anyone's angry. The best arguments I've heard in favor of the Constitutional Convention are actually from progressives who think that there's a chance to insert some more progressive clauses into our Constitution because they think the political tide is in their favor or in the favor of progressive things. So I just don't think I just don't think they're taking into account the money that will flow into delegate elections. So.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, next week we'll be doing a little bit of hashing over what we saw that happened, but we're eager to hear from everybody who's listening about what you're seeing where you are, because as Adam said, there's so much information that sorting through what to trust can be a challenge. But today we're going to talk about something exciting and positive. You know, after the election, I think a lot of us were trying to figure out where we still could have impact and take action. Watching, you know, Jeff Sessions come in as the Attorney General, and Adam Gerhardstein is the Associate Attorney with Gerhardstein and Branch, a civil rights law firm in Ohio. He's also, I should say, the treasurer of CLF and the founding campaign director of Standing on the Side of Love, campaign manager. And so he's very experienced with our congregations and how to engage our congregations in getting active and very creative about that. And I remember after law school, he said, I wish I'd gone to law school before I did all that activism because I would do it very differently now. And I think as we really try to use our privilege to make change, one of the things I always go back to is when Lena Gardner came on and said, Black people are in the streets because that's where we have any influence. But you white people, you've got a lot of influence in other places, so go use it. And I think what Adam and his father and their law firm and others are doing is using their influence to actually hold police accountable for racist violence and for other militarization and unacceptable behavior. So I'm curious, Adam, you know, like you've been at this now for a couple of years, your dad's been at it for decades. You know, what does he say about the trajectory and what do you see even in your, because even though you haven't been there long, you've been there on two very different administrations. So what do you see about what's possible?
Well, that's a good question. And I'll start with, it's true, under President Obama, the Department of Justice was very invested in trying to reform police departments that had systemic civil rights violations. They had investigations into the pattern and practice of using excessive force in cities and entered into consent decrees to get changes into how those communities were policed. Largely not going to continue under Jeff Sessions.
You're in a little bit of sound problem here, I'm sorry to say. I wonder if you can even just turn off your video.
The bigger picture, what we have to remember is that police.
Adam, you're freezing up. I suggest you turn off your video for now so we can hear you clearly, because this is important. Can you say that part again about what you just said?
Yeah, so despite the current administration's likely non-investment in investigating systemic violations of civil rights by police departments, we need to remember that policing is primarily a local issue. There are, well over 1,000 police departments across the nation, in single counties where you have many municipal subdivisions. You're going to have a different police department for each one of those municipalities, and so we need to remember that they're approachable. Your police department you can learn about. You can find out who's responsible for what. And in that, the federal government often seems like this monolith that's so far away and you have no influence over it. And I think with local police departments, they're forced to be responsive to the community. And if the community is asking questions, if the community is investigating how they're being policed and seeking accountability, I think you can achieve that to a degree. Oftentimes it is necessary to get a court involved and to get reform through the courts, through court orders, but that's not the exclusive means of achieving change. And there are many police chiefs and sheriffs who genuinely want to improve the way they police their communities, but there's not always a lot of pressure and a lot of public knowledge into how you go about that.
So I know here in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, I would say the police chiefs are in difficult relationships with the police unions and the mayors. It's these complicated relationships, but is that different from city to city? I mean, here the unions, which are the leadership is elected by the rank and file, and they're very unaccountable to anybody ever. Are we uncommon with that, with the unions?
Speaking generally, and I've only worked in Ohio, but I will say that the unions are very powerful forces within police departments, and their contracts are very strict about how police officers can be disciplined, what is the process of progressive discipline, and often the union attorneys are by far the best attorneys in any if for example, police officer uses excessive force. If the police department wants to discipline them, there's going to be a procedure in place under the union contract that says how they have to go about it. And if they deviate from that and the police officer wants to challenge that, they go through arbitration, and at these arbitration hearings, the union lawyers often are the most versed in the contract and the way it's supposed to happen, and they often win. I mean, sometimes you see these egregious cases where officers maybe even get indicted, and when they get off, they get their jobs back. I mean, it's a force to be reckoned with, but police takes each instance of misconduct seriously and does follow the procedures and does discipline appropriately, sets a good precedent for being able to move up that ladder of progressive discipline. But what you've seen in Minneapolis and what you often see is that the union will protect officers no matter what. And that, I think, is destructive. And I think a police union that is not able to appropriately allow officers who violate civil rights to be held accountable is doing a disservice to the community.
Yeah, I mean, every place is different. Our police officers don't have to live in Minneapolis, so a lot of them live in all white suburbs. They come in, they are extremely racially biased in everything, not everything, but in a lot of what they do. And the union backs them up, and they have elected white supremacists to run it, though, anyway. So it's a really complicated and horrible racist system. So Adam, I mean, when you did work on Standing on the Side of Love, you engaged congregations in taking action. What would you say now, with what you've learned since then, about what kind of action people in our congregations could most effectively take to make change? I remember you saying that in the Washington office, we were constantly pushing for new bills, but there were already tons and tons of them that were getting ignored, that were already passed, and we never were pushing out that people actually hold elected officials accountable for what had already passed. Is that kind of still your thinking? That was a few years ago we had that conversation.
Well, there's certainly way more law in the books than there is going through Congress at any particular time. I mean, I often picture it as like an entire library of existing law, and then each year they're working on one book. So there's certainly a lot of law, and of course the Constitution itself has been instrumental in preserving much of the individual rights and holding police accountable throughout the years of our nation's existence. But to get back to your question, what congregations can do, our congregations are incredibly resourced with talented professionals, and the skills that you find within our congregations are well suited to being good contributors to an overall community effort to increase transparency in policing and increase accountability. For example, one of the most important things that can contribute to better police practices in any local community is data. And there is a huge resistance to using data by police departments, even though they're collecting it all the time. There's all the calls for service when they go out, there's reports associated with them. We know where these calls to service go to. We know who are involved, and sometimes the race, who's being targeted. And what you don't always find is police departments taking all this data, compiling it, and trying to learn lessons from it about what type of arrests are being made, who's being arrested, whether these are quality arrests, or whether they're just sweeping up every black person in low-income neighborhoods that are jaywalking or committing low-level offenses. And our congregations could assist in processing this data. This is mostly public record. It could be requested, and with the help of some attorneys in the congregation or in the broader community, civil rights attorneys, it could be compiled. And when you have that type of evidence about how your community is being policed, our disproportionate number of arrests happening of black people, of black men, are they being arrested for crimes that white people in wealthy neighborhoods are not being arrested for, but are being committed across the board? Why are they being stopped in the first place? Are they just being shaken down? So if this data is compiled, then you have the evidence to ask the tough questions. And that's, I mean, that's media worthy. That's something you can bring to your elected officials, you know, the mayor, the city managers, and try to get answers. Because ultimately, what what you can accomplish in police reform, the low-hanging fruit, the easiest thing is just reducing the number of arrests. I mean, we often talk about mass incarceration and sentencing reform, but if you just reduce the number of people who are being arrested at the outset, then you're keeping people out of the system, and that's good if they're not violent criminals, if they're not folks who, you know, if these are just marijuana busts and low-level offenses, police resources can be distributed differently to address the big community problems and keep the community safe. Um, Without, you know, you never want to jeopardize public safety, but you know, not every arrest is contributing to public safety. And in fact, if you're arresting folks and taking away their jobs and disrupting their families over low-level stuff, then you may be negatively impacting public safety.
So Adam, this is fascinating to me. I have to admit that I didn't even know that that data was available to be asked for. So if we can back up a second, I'm just wondering how you would suggest even starting that conversation, because in my experience, even saying the word data to local police makes you an opponent, right? It sets up an oppositional relationship that you know, this is really not ultimately about, right? We're not. We want to improve everyone, and as you said, most chiefs of police and sheriffs actually want to improve policing. So how do you start that conversation in a way that doesn't automatically trigger this oppositional relationship? How do you ask for the data that you need in order to go forward?
Well, I don't think we should shirk from having what may be perceived as an oppositional relationship. I would view it more as tension. And I think it's healthy to have that tension between yourself and powerful people who have the capacity to abuse that power. I mean, that tension is what accountability and transparency is all about. You know, it's not about getting to a place where we're all holding hands. It's about getting to a place where we're all operating with respect for each other, and sometimes that requires requires you to be in confrontation. But every state, for the most part, has open records laws, which allow anybody, any member of the public, to request documents that are kept by government agencies. And they're all different, and some are more permissive than others. But the general thrust behind them is the philosophy that government should not operate in secret, that it's our taxpayers, that it's our you know, it's the officials who are charged with operating within the law, and so we should be able to get those public records. And the records in particular I'm talking about would mostly be incident reports. Every time a police officer encounters a citizen, makes an arrest, does a traffic stop, there's a piece of paper that goes with it. And so you can request those incident reports that has the basic data of who was involved, who was arrested, who the witnesses were, what the offense was, and a narrative of what happened. And you're only getting the police's version of events, but even under the police version of events, you can often see where there's misconduct happening. And I'll give you an example. We sued the Sandusky Police Department, and in the course of that lawsuit, we gathered their arrests for just disorderly conduct while voluntarily intoxicated, just one offense over a period of a year, and it was a low-level offense, and we found that almost half of those arrests, there probably was not probable cause. They were illegal arrests. And they were basically just arresting every drunk person they came in contact with, or any person who had any alcohol in their system, and that's not a crime. this data, and there were some particularly egregious cases where they would arrest victims of domestic violence who called for help, arrest people in their own home that had called for help simply because they were drunk. And we shared this data with the police chief, and he took it seriously and shared it with all his supervisors, with the city prosecutors, and did a training of the police department, and personally reviewed arrests from that crime over a period of subsequent months in an effort to correct that. And that was all because he had the data. Our one case wasn't enough, but he saw the pattern and saw it would erode trust in the community, and he voluntarily took action to resolve it.
That's such an interesting story where they were actually arresting people for something that wasn't illegal. But the people, a lot of them were probably just taking pleas because they didn't know that, right? And they didn't have good legal representation. The ones that did challenge it probably did not have any, I mean, probably one, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We went and looked at the court records, and I think there was 50 arrests that we determined were without probable cause. The vast majority, the arrestee pled no contest. They pled no contest, which means they didn't admit to the facts, but they just, wanted to get it over with, essentially, and they got a fine and they got out, and they had a criminal record. Of the 10 people who pled not guilty, 9 of them, the prosecutor looked at the file and dismissed the case. I mean, they didn't even pursue it. And what you had was a low-level crime, city prosecutors with 50 files on their desk, picking it up, reading the narrative, the individual saying no contest, okay, here's a $200 fine, and it's just a factory. They're just processing people through, and nobody was taking the time to really review it and determine whether these offenses deserve to be criminalized, or whatever they did deserve to be criminalized. So, and that's all part of the power imbalance. I mean, it's not just the cops that contribute to the criminalization of life in America. It's prosecutors and courts as well, who are just trying to clear their docket and keep things moving.
If a prosecutor drops a case, does that still stay on someone's arrest record? I mean, I imagine arrests stay on a file somewhere, don't they?
Yeah, sadly, I would say 90% of the jurisdictions that or 90% of court systems have online databases where you can search a name, their date of birth, and figure out every time they've had contact with the court system, including cases where charges were filed and then later dismissed. And so, it would never come up as a conviction, but if you're a landlord or you're, an employer, you just go to the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, type in the person's name, and boom, you see they were arrested 3 times. And even though the charges were dismissed, it doesn't look good. And so that's another reason you want to stop arrests before they happen, because a paper trail has begun, and oftentimes it can't be erased.
So even if it's expunged, does it disappear in those systems, or is it still there?
I can't speak across the board on that. I mean, the goal of an expungement is to wipe it out from the entire system, but sometimes there's 2 separate processes, from clearing your official criminal record and then scrubbing everything off the online system. It's not always hand in hand. And so, yeah.
That strikes me as another place where UU congregations could help with getting records expunged. I know here in Minnesota, the governor has to sign expungements. Is that the right word, expungement? But, to get that done takes a certain amount of privilege, frankly. And it seems like you're right, stopping arrests is the best, but then also helping people to clean up, for some of this bullshit, pardon my French, but, just to get it out of the records, because that is exactly what happens, that then people can't find jobs and housing and, all kinds of stuff. And the ban the box is great. We have that here, but all you have to do is Google, you know, I mean, it's just not on the first page.
Yeah, every state has a different process for achieving an expungement, and it's almost always statutory. There's just statutes that lay out the process. Sometimes you have to like get the approval of the prosecutor, and there's a number of different steps to go through. I mean, you have to sort of be careful because you can't practice law if you're not a lawyer, and so you know, there's very limited circumstances under which you can assist somebody seeking some sort of legal remedy. Uh, but uh, but that is certainly something worth exploring. I know in Minnesota, you know, this isn't necessarily about the police, but um, there's a law that allows non-lawyers to give help to tenants tied up in landlord-tenant disputes. And I don't know if you've read The Evicted book, but it's a fascinating book that's sort of the new Jim Crow of for Black women. And the theory there is that eviction is the mass incarceration for Black women, and um, and it's a major justice issue because you've got total disruptions of neighborhoods and lives uh, of Black women, and it's often tied to police. In the city of Milwaukee, if a landlord, if the police are called to a residence 3 times in a month, they can send a notice to the landlord saying, you have to take care of this problem. You need to come up with a solution, or we're going to imprison you as the landlord. And if any landlord that tries to come up with a creative solution and work with the tenant and try to solve the problem can send that plan in to the police department, but they'll often reject it. But if you send in an eviction notice saying, I'm just going to evict this person, then you're going to have your plan approved and you're going to stay out of prison. Meanwhile, who's calling the police 3 times in a month? Victims of domestic violence, people who are in danger. And so you're taking those people and using police power, put them out on the street, make them more vulnerable, and you're not getting them help. So that was sort of an aside.
That's not an aside, because I mean, that totally goes with the absolute racism of the Milwaukee police that's been documented in a million different ways. So yeah, that is, I don't know that book, and we want to put that over in the Facebook note, in the YouTube notes, so that people can read that. Sounds like something very important to read. Huh.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's an ethnography where the author embedded himself with the Milwaukee poor, the white poor and the Black poor, for years, and then wrote about their experience through their own voices. It's great.
Yeah, great. Great and horrifying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Adam, I mean, you've been at this for a while, and I teased you once and said it sounds like you're a private detective as much as a lawyer some of the time, trying to dig up this stuff. I mean, what do you feel like are your, we'll do it standing on the side of love mode, 3 things that you've learned that you think people ought to know about how they could use their power here?
Well, I'll tell you a few things. One, I'll speak first as being a lawyer. One thing I didn't learn in law school was that being particularly a plaintiff's attorney, a litigator, practicing law is 90% about facts and maybe 10% about the law. And I spend my time dealing with real problems that have happened in the world, and trying to find a path to justice. And the courts are all about facts. That's where we go to address real problems. If you have an ethereal or philosophical or potential issue that you're thinking about, a court's going to kick you out. But if you've been hurt, injured, accused of a crime, something concrete that's happened in the world, the courtroom doors are open to you. And as such, as an attorney, I've been privileged and by deal horrors that have happened to people in the world, and I have a front row seat to how the neglect, the indifference, and the abuse of power among police officers and corrections officers and other government officials can totally alter the course of a family's life. And so I would say the first thing that we need to do is appreciate the awesome power of the state. Taking away somebody's liberty is an enormous exercise of power. Using physical violence with the stamp of the state on somebody is an enormous exercise of power. And the intense scrutiny of these actions is totally warranted. And I think our congregations, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, are well situated to provide some of that scrutiny. Yes, it's about reading what's in the news, but it also goes to investigating on a more deeper level about what drives the news. And part of that is the data collection. Part of that is what you were talking about, Meg, learning more about unions and the various forces at play within a police department. And just understanding at a deeper level how power is exercised by the state. In addition to that, I know our congregations are effective at public witness and have lots of experience or to different degrees at being out in the street, being allies, participating in protests, perhaps writing letters to the editor and op-eds. And that's all important, and that should continue. But in the end, I think where it needs to go from there is genuine partnership with affected communities and community groups who are working to reform the way power is used locally by police departments and sheriffs, and through that partnership playing critical roles that are needed. There's going to be Standing on the Side of Love was all about resourcing people to be effective in their local communities. And there's no prescription that can come nationally for this is how you create an accountable, transparent police department. There's guidance, but every police department's different. Every locality needs to be policed in a different way. Just think about the neighborhoods in each city. I mean, where people live, what are the geographic issues that go into policing are huge. And that all needs to be researched individually and with the help of community partners. And we actually are doing a webinar through the CLF to help with this. And my father and I have begun a series over the course of the year leading up to General Assembly where we'll provide some of that guidance to local communities that want to get more engaged in police reform and want to be better community partners. And in fact, it's in our encouragement is that you bring community partners to participate in the webinar, and we can help troubleshoot, educate, and resource your local efforts to police reform. So I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that, Meg.
I mean, let me say a little bit more about that, because I think webinar, people think, oh, you show up, you watch. This is really, I think, a structured learning community for the year with different cities and towns coming in with groups who are taking on some of this data collection, who are power mapping where we live. I'm doing it here in Minneapolis, and I asked both Unitarian Universalists and other community people to be part of a team. We have we did the first webinar, but it's videotaped, and so in my group I'm like, let's wait till after the election because we actually don't know who we're dealing with yet, so don't worry about it yet. But after the election, we're gonna, I'll send out the link so people can watch that, or we'll come together, and then it's to talk through who's already doing this, who can we meet with, who can we talk to, who, you know, who can get involved so that we can, and what I love about it is it gives you homework and a timeline to actually do it, you know, because these are like good ideas that can disappear. And for me, unless it's on my calendar that there's a deadline, I'm just frankly never going to do stuff. So this gives us a learning structure. The next live gathering will be in February. So we have a couple months to start the, you know, the beginning, which really is power mapping and data collection in our own localities. And some of the groups who are in it, like Portland, Oregon, have been doing police monitoring. You know, Kate Lohr, who's not even there anymore, did a whole lot of that when she was there, and the congregation's been really involved. And some of them are brand new to it. And some of them are big cities, and some of them are smaller suburbs, and some of them are kind of, and I don't know how it'll work for them, more regional kind of groups. But I'm really excited to see, because I feel like when we go and just protest, we are really denying who we are and the power that we have with, as you said, Adam, the number of professionals with really good experience and wisdom and access and privilege that we could leverage together. So I'm really excited about this year-long learning environment for us. And for me, this gives me some hope. Like there's something I actually maybe could do that could have impact, because there's so much that I feel helpless about right now that as I watch it roll at me in the media on a federal level. So this, you know, after the election, Adam, I remember saying to you, well, I guess you're kind of screwed in your work. And you said, no, this is so local. We can keep doing it even without the Justice Department. It'll be different, but so much of it's local. So this is me saying it's not too late to sign up for this. It's not too late to gather a group where you are and to think through the kinds of skilled people. And for me, I thought about people with very different skills than mine, people who love data, for instance. That's not my strength at all. But to think through people who love that and love mining data and just, you know, detail people. And eventually we'll reach out to some lawyers, I'm sure. But you know, I really want to encourage people to, if you're interested in this and want to feel like you're actually doing something, to join in and to become part of this larger community. So I'm excited about that. Michael, we have a comment. You want to read that?
Sure. Tad Pinkston on YouTube says that when you seal a record, it should be off the court's website where you sealed it. However, private websites likely will still be selling the information to employers. And that's, you know, oops, sorry. I know about none of this. I have done criminal background checks on people and you know, gotten all sorts of records as hits on those background checks, arrests, and you know, things that say here's what they were originally charged with and here's what they pled guilty to, and you know, it says that right there on the criminal background checks, and I haven't had to do anything with that information, but I imagine some people would.
And something, you know, another aspect to add to this is that usually there's court fees associated with all of these things. So if you want to go get an expungement, often you have to pay a fee to just go through that process. And when you're dealing with a population or poor communities that are going paycheck to paycheck, court fees are a big deal. And there's a lot of people who are in debt to the courts, even when their cases were dismissed, or, you know, who just were arrested wrongfully. And I know in Hamilton County, Ohio, at least, those court fees are actually set by the county clerk, the clerk of courts. And there's some very interesting advocacy that can happen around court fees, and to the degree those are revenue generating sources for the government, whether that's appropriate or not. And there's very similar advocacy going on around money bail. And I think that's an issue that would be very fascinating for a congregation to take on, because our current justice system is not deciding when you're innocent, when you're presumed innocent. If you're rich, you're presumed innocent and go about your business, or you're presumed innocent and you have to sit in jail until your trial. And so our entire judicial system, from the point you're arrested to the point you have your trial, whether or not you get to be free and go to work and help your family, build your defense outside of jail, depends on how much money you have. I mean, there's other factors too. They factor in the nature of the alleged crime and any prior encounters with the law. But in the end, you got to pay to go free. And that there's some real justice issues involved in that some communities are taking a hard look at. And in some communities, they've actually abolished money bail for the most part.
Is that something you can do by passing a local law, or how do they ban it?
That's a good question. And I actually we haven't started that advocacy in Hamilton County, so I haven't had the chance to really research it. But I know that some of the systems might be statewide. I know DC has been making strides toward ending money bail, but of course DC is a small state. It's not a state, but it's got its own judicial system, its own criminal justice system, and so I think that's a area where that's a little easier. Oftentimes it is state law, though.
We saw that so egregiously in Ferguson, where those numbers really started to get spelled out for us in ways that were shocking to me. But I've been hearing them more and more, and Southerners on New Ground did that Mama's Day bailout, which was women who couldn't get out of jail to be with their kids just because of money, and so we could contribute money and get them back with their kids. So I'm really interested if there's a movement building around this and how to change those laws, because I mean that just sounds like that old debtor's prison stuff that we learned about as what would never happen in the United States when I was in grade school.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and there is some real advocacy going on around it, and that's another example of like a story to be told that can be told through the numbers and through the records. I mean, this is if you just, and you also have to look at racial differences and what somebody's bond is set at. And we haven't had a case on this yet, but it is something I would be really interested in looking into. And I think a congregation would be well suited to learn the facts of how the bail system's working. And from what I understand, whether you are out on bail or you're just released and you didn't pay a bail, whether they show up for their trial date, it's pretty much the same. There's not a huge difference if you got money, that you got to get back or not. People show up at pretty much the same rate. So we're sort of, all that data's out there, but that's another issue I just wanted to name.
There's a lot of interest in that in New York, I know, where I think it's a state issue because the courts move so slowly that poor people are being held in jail in places like Rikers Island in New York, which is New York City's jail. It's not a prison. It's New York City's jail, and people are being held there for years, waiting trial, and being killed in prison and things because they're awaiting trial. And so there's a lot of interest in reforming that bail system, and some of that interest is actually coming from the court because they know that their systems are slow because they're underfunded and what. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and one of the an underlying cause there is that our system of justice has become dependent on plea bargains. If every criminal defendant in the United States of America who's been arrested exercised their right to a trial and insisted on going to trial, the criminal justice system would shut down. It would completely shut down. There is not enough resources in the court system for people to exercise those rights. There's a lot of pressure from prosecutors to take a plea bargain. defense attorneys are, you know, they have heavy caseloads and can't promise results. And when they're presented with an option that would be potentially 5 years less in prison, I mean, they have to present it to the client, and the client has to do their risk assessment. So, and of course, this all leads back to whether people are being arrested for you know, whether these are quality arrests and whether the judicial system needs to be clogged up with them.
Yeah. So Adam, you're doing an unusual thing of working with your dad, who's been in this field for, I met him in 1992. He was working on a gay rights case then at the Supreme Court level. But what do you get from, I mean, I'm just thinking of the trajectory of what he's seen, because you've been suing, your firm has been suing prisons and police departments for all that time, what, 30 years, 35 years? What has he, I mean, I'm just curious, he's not here to speak for himself, but does he feel like things are moving ahead or back and forth or all of the above? Or do you have a sense that, you know, the arc of the universe is very slowly bending towards justice here, or snapping back, or all of the above?
Yeah, you know, I ask him about that from time to time, and I'd like to say he said, yeah, we're making great progress, but he's never said that. I mean, it's in certain areas of law, there has been improvement. You know, sex harassment. We don't have nearly the number of sex harassment, you know, blatant cases we once did. Employment, race discrimination. We don't have as many blatant race discrimination cases as we once did. I mean, there's still huge issues, as we know, around sex harassment and race discrimination that we see, but most companies have conformed with the law in those areas. In police misconduct, you know, we see bursts of certain activity. So when tasers were first brought on as law enforcement tools, we had tons of cases on taser misuse. And the Taser International, the company that sells them, and police departments have wised up and reined in the abuse of tasers. And so we don't have nearly the number of taser cases we once did, because the training and the policies are better around it. But on the big issues of excessive force, denial of medical care while people are in jail, we're still got tons of cases. And there's certain trends that are going backwards. I mean, people talk about the militarization of the police. With all the weapons they carry now, there's less of an incentive to really talk down people and de-escalate situations. It's easier to just tase them and handcuff them. And, you know, it's, you know, it is a local issue, and in certain municipalities, policing has improved tremendously. But there's plenty of room for improvement across the board. And this will be, you know, a forever struggle, because we're placing power, an enormous amount of power, in the hands of human beings to determine whether our freedom should be revoked and determine whether they're justified in using violence. And there will always need to be that tension where we're holding them accountable and forcing them to answer for their actions.
Well, thank you so much for your work. It's inspiring, and I want to again encourage folks to join in this learning community for this year. You still have time to assemble a team, and we have recordings, and you know, you can look at we'll post the link for that so that you can check it out. And I'd love to see some more groups come in, because Adam and Al Gerhardstein are real heroes in this regard. And Al actually won I forget the name of the award, but it was a really important social justice award for his decades of work. Which one was it, Adam? Do you remember?
Holmes Weatherly.
Oh, Holmes Weatherly Award. That's it. He won that at General Assembly last year, 2 years ago. Next week, we're going to have Laura Barrett, who's the new Executive Director of Interfaith Worker Justice. She's a Unitarian Universalist. We're really excited to hear what is going on in the realm of fighting for worker justice. Michael Tino, you will not be here, I know. You'll be off.
I will be on a plane returning from Cincinnati, actually. So.
Hey, Cincinnati is the connection here. And Jessica, thank you so much. We'll put that link up. Really check it out for your learning community to come and do some of this real important work. Save real lives and families. Thank you.
Thanks.